everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts. Well, I've got one of my fabulous co-hosts right now joining us live via Zoom, everyone's favorite platform these days.
It's me, Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi, I'm at my house and not at your house.
No, I know. I was telling our other special guest that this is a very different workflow. So forgive me, audience, if I completely forget catchphrase or anything like that.
Yeah. Social distancing, y'all.
Yeah. Diana will be joining us shortly. She's just dealing with some childcare issues. But in the meantime, and then also after she comes back, he'll stay on, I hope. We have another special guest joining us. Who's our other special co-host for tonight?
Hey everyone, it's Matt Cicoria from the Behavioral Observations podcast. How are you guys doing today?
Yeah, Matt. Yeah.
Good, yeah. Well, it's so good that Matt could join us. But before we get into more discussion, I'll remind our audience that ABA Inside Track is a behavior analytic podcast. Every week, we pick a topic, and then we talk about research related to that topic. And sometimes we're fortunate, and we can get another expert in the field to join us, which is why we have Matt joining us again today.
I was going to say, but today.
Except for today.
That's right.
No, we've had, you might have heard Matt a few times, either because you've heard his podcast, and since we were like the two only behavior analytic podcasts for a while, I'm sure if you listen to ours, you've listened to Matt's. But just in case you haven't, we'll give him a chance to do his intro. You also might have heard when we do our year-end reviews. We've done our last 2 years. We've done that as a whole group. So you probably heard his voice a few times. But Matt, just in case, before we get into our topic for today and our articles, would you mind letting the audience, just in case, know a little bit more about you?
Absolutely. My name is Matt Cicoria. I am the host of the Behavioral Observations podcast, and been doing that for a little over 4 years. And I think right around the time you guys started as well. So we've both been at this for a little bit. And, you know, some people may or may not know this, but I actually am a practicing behavior analyst who does actual behavior analytic work, or at least attempts to. So in my day job, I have a consultancy called Positive Behavioral Outcomes, and I consult to schools mainly in New Hampshire and Vermont. So I live in New Hampshire and serve the kind of northern New England region, and have been doing so. Oh boy, I've been up here since like 2004 or so. So when I'm
not gonna lie, I'm super jealous of your northern New England, area. I love Vermont. I love New Hampshire. I may move into your house. Creepy.
All right. Okay. We'll charge reasonable rates. Yeah, I've got a great Airbnb rating, so I'll be a super host.
So Matt, as a school consultant, that's one of the reasons we wanted you on this episode, because, surprise, our topic is going to be on how can BCBAs consult to schools. And so we're getting articles together. So when I'm not podcasting, that also is, similar to my job. However, I've worked in school districts for a while. Oh, here we go. Diana has joined us. Hey, Diana.
Hello.
Our other guest. No, you're not a guest. Co-host.
Yep, I'm always here.
Always here. So I've worked in schools for many years as well, sort of in a consulting role, but a little bit different, I think, than you, Matt, because you have your own, a company that does consulting to schools. So while I think a lot of, topographically, our work probably looks pretty similar, you are coming into schools from, as an outside person, not as necessarily a staff member in the schools, correct?
Yeah. In this era of social distancing, it also means that I'm not an employee of a school district, so that's some payment implications, or the lack thereof. So
that could be tough. So why don't I tell everyone what articles we will be discussing? So we're going to be talking about a couple different articles, and sometimes we go into these in detail. Sometimes on these episodes, we sort of just generally talk about the articles. I think it's going to be more of the latter today, but just in case you want to have some extra resources, we'll be sort of talking about school consulting as well as a couple articles, including 10 Rules for Discussing Behavior Analysis by Critchfield from Behavior Analysis and Practice 2014, which is the shortest article, I think, ever. It's about 2 pages, or page and a half.
Concise.
It is concise.
Yes.
That's a better term. Yes. We're also going to be talking a little bit about increasing intervention implementation in general education following consultation, a comparison of 2 follow-up strategies by Noell, Witt, LaFleur, Mortenson, Ranier, and LeVelle from Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis 2000. Consultation is an implementation strategy for evidence-based practices across multiple contexts, unpacking the black box by Nadine, Bleacher, and Batis. And that's from Administrative Policy of Mental Health and Psychology from 2013. Matt, you recommended this one from Rural Special Education Quarterly, which is the second time we have an article from Rural Special Education Quarterly, and they've both been really good articles.
It reminds me of Obscure Sports Quarterly from what movie is it?
Yeah.
Dodgeball.
Yes, very true. Very true. It seems like come from the same cloth there.
Right.
Board certified behavior analysts and related ethical and professional practice considerations for rural schools by Menendez, Mayton, and Urich from their 2017 issue. And very briefly, just as I thought this was kind of an interesting extension, competent consultation, developing self-efficacy for process and problem aspects of consultation from Guini and Zabulski in Journal of Educational and Psychological Consultation, the Journal for Consultants. So why don't we start?
Really Lotus is up there.
Well,
articles.
Again, I think it's their reference material. We'll refer to them. We'll discuss one or two of them, but we're mostly going to talk about specific skills and situations that we've had and expertise we have. And I know, Matt, just to give everyone a sneak preview, listen to the end because Matt has 11 awesome consulting tips for behavior analysts. So we're going to go through those at the end. Well, he's going to go through those.
Yeah,
we're just
almost
listen.
1 hour now to figure out what those are, Matt.
That's right. I got to get started. Yeah. If I'm quiet in the background, you know what's going on. Hey, before we get started, so if people want to know where these references can be found, where can they go?
Oh, well, we always have them on our website, abainsidetrack.com. So we have links to them. Now, some of them are free. Some of them you have to, either ask the author or get them through like a library, university library. But we do have the links, so at least you know where to find them after the fact.
Go to the
Go to the BCBA
Some
website.
of them, yeah. Some of them you can. If they're Java or behavioral interventions, which we have a Java, but that's an older one. So that one actually should be free. Cool. Some of these journals, they're making you pay like $40 for, a 10-minute sneak peek. It seems like it's really tough.
Not okay.
All right.
Email the author. Can't stress that enough. I've never been turned down for an article when I've emailed the author, and they've been exceedingly gracious in sharing more information than I would have asked for. So that's not one of the 11 tips either.
That's a freebie.
Bonus.
That's right.
So, Matt, why don't we start by talking about what does it mean to consult? Because I don't think I ever thought about it as one of those things. People ask me, like, what do you do? I'm like, I consult. And everyone sort of nods their head. Oh, okay. But then when we were starting to kind of prep for the episode and look at notes, I was like, you know what? What is the actual definition of that job? So what do you consider to be consultation for a BCBA?
What's your job description, basically, Matt?
Well, I oftentimes refer to the adage, an expert's just someone from out of town. And I don't know if that's a Mark Twain-ism or not. It's been ascribed to him, but yeah, oh my gosh, it's so true. And so I oftentimes fulfill that, check that box, I guess is what I'm saying. So I actually don't consult to the school district I live in. Yeah. And if I had more, if I thought about it longer, I could, consult comes from the Greek word, but I don't have anything erudite to say, but, generally speaking, what I try to do is I try to help people solve problems, and so what are those problems? Obviously, I'm a behavior analyst. I'm trying to help people with their students and trying to help them manage challenging behaviors in a way that's effective, that improves the lives of, the students and everyone around them. So that's pretty much it. So I spend a lot of time talking with teachers. I spend a lot of time doing, functional assessments, developing behavior support plans, et cetera. And there's the technical aspects that go into that, but that's actually a pretty small percentage of it. There's so much more that goes into it that is very intangible. I'm looking forward to talking about that more, or at least hashing out what those intangibles are with you guys, because I know you guys have a lot of overlapping experience as well.
I think you're kind of, the quote or putative quote, I guess, the sort of the expert from out of town. That mostly feels like when I'm in the role, like I'm in my consulting mode. There's a problem. I'm somebody who wasn't there when the problem started. I'm now here to try to help everyone solve the problem. But again, in a way where I'm going to give the information and then I'm going to leave, and maybe I'll come back a few times, but I'm going to sort of like sneak away at some point and go somewhere else.
It's like that Simpsons meme where Homer retreats into the hedge. He goes
That's exactly what I was
further and further back. And it's like, I'm just going to go now.
That is a question, right? Is how much maintenance or follow-up is there in the consulting role? And it seems like that can vary a lot based on the role.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, that just varies based off of what the nature of the consultation job is in the first place. So sometimes there are school districts who hire me to do kind of like a one-off. They have one case that they're really scratching their heads over, and I'll come in, I'll do an assessment, present to the team, make some recommendations, and then kind of that's that, and then there are certain school districts that I have relationships with that have been, that are many, many years, kind of like an ongoing presence there. So in many respects, so those are two very different settings and circumstances for sure.
So one of the things we're going to kind of generally talk about the Nadim article now in terms of some of our other discussion questions, but looking at that article, I sort of liked the idea of consultation as they refer to it as part of like being implementation science. So a lot of what we're doing is not just solving a problem, but we're also disseminating information. And I think especially for behavior analysis, that is both a pro and a con of much of our consultation. The pro being it's a chance to tell everyone how great behavior analysis is and get them on board. The con is sometimes people do not want to hear from the BCBA say, did the parent ask for you to come? I don't want to do your behavior stuff. So it can be almost a barrier. And I mean, that comes up a lot in the literature of how to get buy-in from folks. I mean, has that been kind of your sense too, Matt?
Oh, it's a total barrier. It's interesting. Before the country went on lockdown last week, the week before, I did a training in a district. They gave me 90 minutes to speak to all the paras in the district. And, and I've done these types of trainings before, and I have plenty of stuff in the can that I could have just, thrown up on the screen and, done in my sleep, but I completely scrapped it and just started from a fresh PowerPoint. I was, and I didn't even reference any of the previous PowerPoints that I had put together that I've been using for years and years and years. And so the goals, I guess, where I'm, what I was trying to do is try to describe things in ways that, I guess let me back up for a second. What I used to do is like, this is behavior 101. I mean, I didn't say it just like that, but I didn't call it behavior 101, but I'm like, this is positive reinforcement and this is negative reinforcement, and I would do like my little grid and all that stuff. And I've actually retired that a while ago. And upon some reflections, like my goal here is not to teach behavior and analysis. My goal is to help these people and give them some tools to make their day better. And how is their day made better? Well, if they have little Johnny, being less, frankly, being less of a pain in the butt, they see little Johnny making progress, that's going to make their day better, And then for those who are really interested in what underpins all this stuff, I'm happy to, get into the technical weeds with them. And so I think the title of my talk was something like how to help your kid learn better, behave better while not going crazy at the same time, or something like. It was very like BuzzFeedy type of thing,
know. Very practical.
Number 7 will get you, Matt.
That's right. You'll be surprised at number 5.
I think that's actually a really good way to bring about, though, because I remember when I first got my BCBA back in 2006. And my first job out of the gate was a consulting job, and I was really bad at it. I'm not going to lie. I was horrible at it because I did exactly what you said to do. Like what you said not to do is like, okay, here's what behavior analysis is. Right?
It's awesome, and I want to tell you everything about it.
And nobody cares about that. Like teachers don't want a crash course in behavior analysis. They want, here's what I need you to do. Do it. Things are going to be better. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And nobody liked me. I was like I was working in a Montessori school. Who consults to a Montessori school, right? Like, why did I do that? Not sure. But we were not on the same page, and I was not doing a great job of compromising at all, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, behavior analysis is the best. Everything else is the worst. And you can't really do that when you're working with real people.
Yeah.
Nope.
Right.
Not at all. Yeah. It's like there's no marketing adage as well. It's like you sell the benefits, not the features.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always use the example of the Matthew McConaughey Lincoln commercials. Have you seen those commercials on TV?
Yeah, when he's
Is that
like,
when he's in the land of lean beef?
That's beef. That's pork or something. Or lean, no, it's lean beef, I guess.
If you haven't seen these commercials, and maybe if you could find one on YouTube and put it in the show notes, Rob, it might be illustrative of it. But there's the, so I'll set the scene for you, for those who are unfamiliar with these, but there's these commercials for Lincoln cars, and it's like there's a series of them, and Matthew McConaughey is like the spokesperson for him, and they're just these scenes of him driving, and he's just being cool like only Matthew McConaughey could be, and that's pretty much it of the commercial. It's Matthew McConaughey being cool in a Lincoln car, And, so it's not, they're not talking about like the power windows or satellite navigation or like the 0 to 60 time or, whether there has analog brakes. In other words, they're not going through the features of the automobile. It's like the benefit is like, if I get a Lincoln, I might be half as cool as Matthew McConaughey, and that's pretty damn cool. That's the benefit. That's the selling proposition. And I think we have to, and I'm using this example just to be silly here, but we have to approach what we do with lay people in that way. Mm-hmm. We have to, quote unquote, sell them on the benefits. What would your life be like if you didn't have to have this disruption in your class 5 times? What if you didn't have to clear your classroom 3 times a week? What if you didn't have to get all these phone calls from angry parents because they're complaining that, their kids coming home and complaining about this particular behavior problem in your class? So, those are some of the entry points that, one might consider using or at least thinking about, okay, what are the ways in which we can make this teacher's life better? Not make it better in terms of making the problem go away, because sometimes that happens too. Like the teacher sees the consultant as the means to an end to get a kid out of the classroom or get a kid a 1-to-1 or to do something that doesn't require them to do something. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah. And I think kind of when we talk about the form the consulting can take, I know the consulting that is probably what you think of from watching the movies is going to be sort of that like, oh, we need you to come in and do like an amazing talk for 30 minutes, like your Alec Baldwin at the beginning of Glenn Ross, and you're just coming in to get everyone like, these are the leads, first prize, you're going to get, the car. And I think we all sort of think like, ooh, that sounds like a great job. But then think about how much nobody cared about Alec Baldwin in that scene. If you've seen the movie, this guy's a jerk. He's coming in, at best, he's sort of galvanizing the troops of like, oh, wow, I'm excited to learn more about this. But there's not necessarily going to be a lot of change long-term going on at best. At worst, who does this guy think he is? Or this lady think she is, coming in and telling us all this stuff and think they're so great? I don't want to hear it from this consultant. It's become kind of like a scary term, like a consultant's coming in like, uh-oh, what's that going to be? Yeah.
And one of the things too is that sometimes teachers get consultants thrust upon them, meaning that, they're having difficulties with classroom management, and their solution to that might be having fewer kids or having more aides in the class or what have you. And 9 out of 10 times, those aren't options, and so you might get someone who's looking for those outcomes regardless of how improbable they might be. And you're trying to sell something else, like, and that sometimes can be very difficult.
Yeah. I never thought I would ever want this list, but I kind of did like how the Nadim article had like a nice list of what are the functions of a consultant. So I just kind of want to go through those real quick. I had them in the notes in terms of like, these are sort of tasks that one might be asked to do as a consultant. And then maybe talk about a few of the ones that we either prefer to do or we make sure are always a component of our consultation. Certainly, they looked at providing continued training as something that a consultant would often do. And I know for me, I love that one when it is ongoing. So like you were saying, Matt, sometimes you have districts that have hired you repeatedly. So you have a relationship with the policymakers, you have a relationship with multiple teachers. Those are my favorite cases to be a part of, because I'm not coming in as an outside person. I know that I'm wanted because it's, the second or third or fourth time I've been in the area. And I'm usually starting from a place of I've gotten results. Maybe I haven't solved every problem, but I've at least built a good enough relationship that people see me as someone that they want to be a part of a team. And then, you get to build on that. So, you didn't start with the Behavior 101 talk the first or second time, but maybe that third time you get called in. Hey, you know what? This reminds me of last time. What if we, and then you kind of have your in and people are more interested in hearing it from you at that point.
Yeah, totally.
And certainly that would include things like using assessments and doing assessments. And we always do assessments and then kind of tailoring the job over time. A second one, I think, is the one that everyone thinks of. That's what a consultant does. I'm here to solve a problem. But what they mention, and I think is very important to differentiate from what's going to make a good versus a less good consultant, is thinking about it as not just I'm someone who can come up with an answer, but as someone who can have an answer, understand why that is or is not the best answer based on the barriers of the environment you're in. And if I still think this is the best answer, how am I going to be an agent of change in terms of overcoming those barriers rather than this is the behavior plan you need. If you don't run it, you're never going to solve this kid's problem and you're going to have a terrible year. I know you want an aid or I know you want this to happen. I know your principal says, no, you can't do this, but this is all I have. So there you go. Take it or leave it. That's the consultant that probably isn't going to get asked back. thank you so much for coming. Please leave. So, thoughts on that one?
Yeah. I mean, there are certain times where you have to be more nuanced and try to say, well, I can't provide those resources right now. And I don't have the authority to provide or not provide or, those resources right now. So what do we have to work with? What we have to work with is what's here in this classroom. And I can help you perhaps with regard to identifying and sourcing things that would be reinforcing. I can provide easy ways to help you implement and so on and so forth, and so you start thinking about, okay, what are the things we can do after just, kind of listing some of the ways in which we can't solve the problem in the way in which the teacher would like it to be solved. So I think there's, that's sometimes a little bit, you're still kind of using the kind of realism, I guess, angle, but you're presenting that realistic picture in a way that's empathetic, It's not like, well, I can't help you there, so you got to do this, or, as you said, take it or leave it, if that doesn't work, you might actually need to have the kind of the more challenging conversation of, okay, well, so if you get the continuous, yeah, but, and I always tell people when I'm consulting, like, please give me the yeah, but questions. If you're asking those questions after I leave, chances are you have some doubt about what we're doing. Chances are that, there are things that I've done or said or presented or suggested that aren't clear. And so I'd really rather know about them at the point in which I can address them, so I guess there's some of those things that you can go through first of, kind of first steps and things like that. Then maybe you do have to get to that point where you say, well, okay, well, I've provided all the assistance I can right now, and so hopefully you don't get to that point, but those conversations have happened certainly from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Couple others from the list. So, easy ones to be like, provide case support. Well, yeah, that's the easy one. Hopefully you're coming in, your stuff. You've been keeping up with the research, so you have answers to a lot of the questions.
You've been listening to ABA Inside Track.
Yeah. And behavioral observations. Don't forget, you got 2 sources. You got more, but these are the 2 best ones I've heard. It's just, the rumor.
I don't know. It's hard to keep track of them all these days, right?
I mean, by the time we're done with the shutdown, everyone's going to have their own podcast and streaming.
Oh man, I've seen some memes on that that cracked me up, but I won't sidetrack us any further.
Certainly engaging with the provider. We've kind of talked about that, like making sure to have a dialogue. Who are your clients? I mean, I think that's one of the odd things is when you're working with the school, you have to remember who are your clients. And, I know that's got to be really tough for you as well, Matt, but it's a sense of, well, I want to help the student, but I was hired to work with this teacher to help the student. And the student has parents and the teacher has a principal and the district has a superintendent. So you've got, about 50 bosses who are sort of in charge.
That's right.
And making sure you're making everybody happy. You're including everyone in the planning.
That's right. There's endless frames of coordination. Yeah. Who was really good on this is Missy Olive. She was on, Dr. Missy Olive was on my podcast a few episodes back. She talked at length about that. And so that might be a good resource for the listeners to check out, because we did get into that in length. And, frankly, she did a much better job than articulating it than I probably can right here. But yeah, you definitely have to pay attention to like, okay, what are you there for? And that has to be the conversation, with the special ed director or whoever the hiring authority is who's engaging you as a contractor in that situation. So what is the purpose of the consultation? And then that would guide in terms of, who's the client. Obviously, if I'm there to do a functional behavioral assessment, provide some recommendations for behavior treatment plan for a kiddo, the learner is the client. But if it's providing program support to an alternative classroom, that's a different consideration altogether.
Right.
And a different client, kind of.
Yeah.
It's not going to be an individual client. It's going to be a classroom client.
Yeah.
So another area that they list, and I think is a great one, this was sort of meant for general psychologists or consultants, but more psychologists than say behavior analysts, is being accountable to the treatment that you're recommending. And I think that's a lot easier for us. I mean, it's going to be the same in psychology ethics guidelines, but all of our guidelines speak to, are you looking at data? Are you making sure that your treatments are effective? And we also understand that if we come in and we're like, here's what you got to do, behavior analysis, and you can't, quote unquote, fix the problem, you're getting no buy-in. No one wants to hear your excuses. No one wants to hear, well, human behavior no one wants to hear it. You didn't make a case for yourself. You're not able to demonstrate success. But, the fact that so much of our work is looking at data, analyzing data, making changes based on data, kind of puts us in a good position to always be one step ahead of whatever the next possible problem could be. We're always thinking about what are the factors that make this less successful than we would expect based on our knowledge of the student, our knowledge of the classroom, our knowledge of the reinforcers and possible punishers, reversives in this environment. So in that regard, I think we're always accountable for our treatments. We're always thinking about that.
Yeah, I would put a little bit of asterisk on that, Rob, though, because at least in terms of the data analysis piece, I'm sure you've seen situations where you've put together a data collection system and you show up the next time and guess what? There's no data, and there's all the reasons under the sun why the data weren't collected. So-and-so was out, or I lost the form, or, the list is endless, so I think for BCBAs who might be making the transition from like working in a clinic or working, doing in-home stuff with RBTs to a school setting, it's definitely school staff don't get trained in the same way that RBTs do in terms of the primacy and the importance of collecting treatment data, regardless of what repertoires they're tracking. So there has to be a little bit of a comfort level with some messiness, frankly. And sometimes you have to make some decisions because at the end of the day, you have to produce something. And I'm not saying you do things like in a slipshod way or whatever, but you might have to rely on crappier sources of information, if you will. Go look that up in the white book, and that can be a struggle. I've always lived in the gray area, if you will. And so for me, it's, it's not that much of a stretch for me, but if you're a super black and white person and you're kind of rigid about these sorts of things, that's going to be something that you'll need to get used to, and obviously you can do things to improve data collection, like by thanking people for, by being reinforcing, by creating data collection systems that aren't onerous. That's the biggest thing. But at the same time, you have to balance that with if you're doing some sort of partial interval with an ungodly large, time interval, well, then, your data will not be all that great. But sometimes you're looking at like incident reports or something like that, so maybe you have to look at some things that are more macro, and so like if you're working with a school that has like a Swiss data collection system, and that's an SWIS, it's like an acronym for school-wide information system or some such thing. I'm probably getting that wrong, but that's,
Sounds
it has nothing to do with the country, or cocoa, so sometimes you're sifting through stuff like that, and they've got these like lame target behaviors like defiance and disrespect.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
all these, just terrible, target behaviors. And you're reading through this stuff, trying to put the pieces together, so it is kind of like being a detective, it's like, so yeah. So there's all of that stuff, so that's, we have to kind of be okay, or at least learn how to manage an environment where the data aren't as precise as you'd like them to be. And again, certainly there are things you can do to improve that once you're on the ground, but it can be hard, and there could be something like, you essentially you're at a certain level, at times you're kind of teaching the staff how to work with you. And so you might need to say, if let's say you have like a weekly visit scheduled or something like that, it's like, well, I'm going to, give you some, some of these forms. I'd like you to, do X, Y, and Z whenever a problem behavior occurs, whether it's ABC data, frequency recording, yada, yada, yada. And if you come back, it hasn't happened. And then you start asking like questions. Okay, well, what was the barrier? What got in your way? Not in a berating way, because you don't want to become an aversive stimulus to these people, right? But at the same time, even asking some of those questions can be uncomfortable, right? Because you're putting people, on the spot, and that for many can be uncomfortable. But if you're cheery about doing that, and it can actually work. In other words, they might fill data out to avoid having that discussion that they might, and so there's a little bit of that too, as long as so anyway, those are just some of the data collection issues that I've run into commonly.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, Matt, is learning the difference between what's the data you want, what's the data you need to make decisions. I know it's something I used to be terrible at. I assumed, I was trained at a private school. where everyone learned how to do the major, formats of data. Everyone learned time sampling. Everyone learned frequency. So there was an expectation of like, oh, you're a 1-to-1. I was a 1-to-1 before I, like last year before I became a BCBA. I assume you can do all the same stuff I could do.
And
so
that the motivation is there, right? Because we love data. I love nothing more than having a big pile of data that I then get to analyze, but not everyone sees data the same way, right? So I love the points you brought up, Matt, about how you might make changes on both the antecedent side and the consequence side regarding data collection, right? How can you make it as easy as possible, indicate why it matters, and then reinforce if it does occur and problem solve when it doesn't.
Right. And you also have to think about when you're only there for one time, right? So the majority of my consulting now is a one-time off, right? Like I go to a place, maybe I have a week there that I'm going to consult, then I'm not going to ever go back again. Data collection is going to be vastly different than if I was going to go back in and be monitoring that situation, right? So I may just teach them the bare minimum to see change and not necessarily like a complex data collection. Maybe I'm like, oh, you should just write down when the behavior occurs. Oh my gosh, look at you, right?
Yep.
That might be the most, and that might be good for them right now because that was something that they weren't doing before.
Yeah. Just check a box that challenging behavior occurred this hour, yes or no. Like I don't care about the topography. That's it.
Yeah. Or even
maybe the day.
Another thing I think there's two other points I think I'd like to make on this. One is that if you're going to have people take data, you better use it.
Right.
And I don't know about you guys. I've seen people collect, and I've been guilty. all these things I've done. I know because I've made these mistakes personally. So I'm not saying this from a soapbox.
Right.
And again, this is back when I was a young BCBA, and it's like, yes, I'm gonna kind of like what you were saying, Jackie, earlier. And it's just like, yeah, we're gonna collect all this information, and I'm gonna make all these graphs. I'm gonna do like a little histogram of the antecedents and the histogram of the consequences, and I'm gonna do this little scatter plot with the time, and blah blah blah. If you're not using that information, then you don't have the right to ask people to take it in the first place. Right. You can't waste people's time, especially teachers. They're incredibly sensitive to that, if I may make a gross generalization. I happen to be married to a teacher, so I have a little bit of inside info on this. So there's that. And then secondly, what I also find important to do is to show people the graphed data, just to say, hey, this is the fruits of your labor. All these little things these things you're checking here or whatever, it's adding up to this, especially if the data are going in the right direction. You see, we started out way up here and now we're down here, or if it's the other way, that's the desired direction, and so started out down here and now we're up here, and so and I wouldn't know that if you guys didn't do all this hard work collecting this information, and so that's something that I try to do is when I can remember to do it. Or when things happen to be going in the right direction. Sometimes I want to rename my company Moderate Behavioral Outcomes. Sometimes okay behavioral outcomes, depending on how things are going. Positive behavioral outcomes. Sometimes it's like, did I put an implicit promise in the title of my of my company?
You could call it
There's so much pressure.
World's okayest.
World's okay. Right. Fingers crossed.
He's okay. Could tell it's Sunday night, right?
Oh yeah. A few more things on the list. We've covered a couple of them, but the Deem and colleagues suggest as part of consultation, and they mention training the consultee to mastering a skill. And like we talked about, there are times when that is going to be part of your job, but that's not always going to be part of the contract. If you're hired, just come in and tell everyone about taking basic data, or come in and talk about ways to, they wouldn't call it antecedent manipulations if they're calling us, but, talk about ways to stop problems before they happen. Then you're not really training anyone to mastery. It's a workshop or a didactic instruction. Though certainly sometimes it's please come in and come up with a full elaborate plan for this entire classroom, in which you probably would want to reach a level of mastery with the individual you're working with. And then tied into that, sort of the idea of, well, how can you help adapt treatments to different settings or situations and plan for sustainability, which again, if you can train up to mastery, you're hopefully going to be able to, assist with what is this going to look like, especially in schools next year, or when the student moves from elementary school to middle school, or middle school to high school, where it's brand new people working with a student, and you might have had everything going great for 3-4 years, and then brand new people, they're like, We don't do that at this brand new place. Where
Oh man, all the school-based BCBAs are nodding their head right now. Well, I'm sure once they're listening to this, I'm like, yeah.
Hey everybody, really quickly, I just wanted to remind you that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to this podcast, you are able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is go to the website, abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs, and enter in some information, including the 2 secret code words, the first one of which I'm going to give you right now. You'll have to keep listening for the second one. And the first one is BEARD. BEARD. Yes, in case you didn't know, one of our special guests, I guess key features, if you looked at his podcast art, is his luxurious beard. Beard.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And let's get back to the show.
That kind of is a good place to move into our next discussion point, which is sort of describing, like, is there a typical consultation process? Or is it one of those, just like with a lot of things, where every single one is going to be totally different? You know, maybe you have 4 or 5 general patterns, but it's never the same twice, which, I mean, that goes without saying. You know, very few cases are exactly the same. But I mean, is there one you find in your travels?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I can tell you what I do, and you know, it's funny. It's having this conversation is something I've been looking forward to do, because it really made me kind of reflect on just kind of the stuff that I just kind of do without really thinking. And it made me think, wow, I can actually, you know, probably create some sort of system around this. So this has been, you know, kind of helpful for me to look at my own practice. So I guess I should say thanks before moving, you know,
you're very welcome.
But
thank you.
You know, I mean, there's some, you know, so a lot of, you know, so there's a, you know, let's just take it in the context of doing some sort of functional assessment, you know, so what are the basics? And I think we all can probably identify the basics, right? You know, we're obviously going to want to do some sort of interview, whether it's structured or open-ended. You know, we want to have what I call the "why am I here" conversation. Mm-hmm. You know, and if I'm in the schools, it's interesting. This varies, but you know, a lot of schools I work at, they'll give me a referral, and there's not really a huge expectation of parent involvement, and that's something I've really try to educate them on. So I really try to, you know, at the very least, get the parent in a meeting, or even if it's a phone call. You know, and so I spend some time with the parent saying, this is what a functional assessment is. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not this magic wand that people, you know, talk about or whatever. It's a very practical procedure here. And all we're trying to do is figure out why, you know, your son or daughter does X, Y, and Z, and try to identify some ways to help them be more successful. And, you know, again, I really try to, you know, adhere to the, you know, Pat Fryman's adage of plain language, please. So that's something I've really tried to focus on more in the last couple of years. You know, so obviously you want to, you know, talk to all the stakeholders, I guess is what I'm getting at. You know, you want to do that, obviously do some sort of observation, but what, you know, I'd be curious to hear what your guys' experience is with this, but there's so many times when I go to observe a kid in a classroom, and guess what?
What?
No problem behaviors occur. So,
yeah.
They're model citizens. It happens all the time. All the time. And nothing pisses off a teacher more than that happening. They're like, why weren't you here yesterday? or I'll get this too. I'll get, not 10 minutes after you left. Yep. You know, Bobby was doing X, Y, and Z. Oh my gosh. And so I get that a lot, but a lot of time, you know, so you have to go into it knowing that you probably, you know, depending on the nature of the problem behavior, of course, if you're dealing with a kiddo who has, you know, chronic and, frequent problem behaviors, yeah, obviously you're going to have more of an opportunity to see it. But anyway, so there's some sort of observation. My general rule, so my rules of observations are, I have a couple that I try to loosely adhere to. One is I ask the teacher not to do anything differently. Mm-hmm. You know, and so sometimes the teachers will. They're like, "Do you want me to? I can get him going. I promise." You know, and it's like, no, I can just ask you the question of what you can do to get him going. We don't need to cause a meltdown here on purpose.
I'll trust you that if you really wanted to, you know, have a child have a tantrum in the middle of a classroom, you could do it.
And obviously, if we're setting up some sort of functional analysis, that's a whole different. You know, that's a whole different ball game, of course. Where you know you prepare, you sow the field for that, as it were. You know, so there's that. This happens to me a lot as well. So I'll come to a school and either the principal or the special educator, whatever, you know, will greet me. They'll give me the lowdown, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, you know, we agree, like, okay, well, you know, let's go observe and I'll bring you to the classroom. And, you know, sometimes in schools, this might surprise some people, may not others, but sometimes one hand doesn't always know what the other one's doing. And not for lack of trying or anything like that, but schools are just these weird places where there's a lot going on and not everyone, you don't have time, the luxury of time to kind of converse and connect and all that stuff that you know, you'd like to. So sometimes that leads to a situation where the principal is bringing you to the door of the teacher's classroom and say, here, go sit down. The teacher has no idea who I am, why I'm there. I have no idea where I'm going to sit. I'm kind of fussy about where I like to sit in a classroom. Like, you know, and so from my way of thinking, the ideal circumstance would be to meet the teacher to explain, you know, this is what I'm doing here. Mm-hmm. I want to sit someplace where it's out of the way. I don't want to be in anyone's way. So don't sit me right next to the kid. Don't announce my presence to the, you know, I've had that happen. Fortunately, not frequently, but this is Mr. Cicoria. He's here to, and it's like, shut up. You know, but that's a function of me not having the opportunity to lay this groundwork ahead of time. Kids sometimes ask, you know, who I am, either directly to me or to the teacher. And I always just tell the teacher, say, I'm here to watch me, you know, that this gentleman's here to watch me teach. And that's how I usually respond to, you know, children when they ask me. And really here's another thing. Don't go in when the teacher is like mid-lesson. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to command the attention of 25 or, you know, 20 or 25 second graders. If you come in unannounced or, you know, that can be very disruptive. And guess what? You're going to have a harder time forming a relationship with that teacher as a result of that. You know, some teachers are very open and they are, you know, they're very welcoming. They say, you can come in anytime you want. You never have to tell me. You never, you know, just come in whenever. Come in, you know, and that's obviously really a great situation. That's what that's ideal, certainly. But you never really want to do that the first go around. Mm-hmm. You know, you're a guest in their classroom.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And you have to have that level of respect for the classroom teacher. That's their space. And so those are you know, so I guess I'm just went off on a wicked tangent on observing, but you know, so anyway, so you have the interviews with the stakeholders, the observations, but you know, some sort of data collection, whether that's researching what's already been recorded in, you know, some sort of incident reports or something like that. You know, if there's some sort of functional analytic manipulation you need to make to kind of confirm your hypothesis, you know, I'm usually consulting with kids with, you know, emotional behavioral challenges. Gosh, I hope the FDF people aren't listening to this when I say this, but you know, there are some kids that I've worked with where you can give them heaven and earth and they're already accelerated to the point where they don't calm down, essentially. I mean, everyone calms down eventually. Mm-hmm. But even, you know, there've been some kids I work with that's been very difficult to even do like precursor analyses, and, you know, the reinforcer sometimes morphs as a function of time throughout the temporal sequence of the event.
Yep.
You know, so like I've had some kids who act out in the classroom, they escape to, you know, then we take them, you know, just out of some sort of, you know, kind of emergency management procedure, would bring them to another room where they can de-escalate, where there's nothing to, you know, hit, kick, punch, destroy, essentially, you know, and then people are kind of like blocking and redirecting. And then, you know, for some kiddos, I see the function of the behavior kind of, you know, it's got going with, whatever the attention, escape, tangible, combination was in the classroom setting. And now it's, can I win the boss battle? Can I land a blow on these staff members who are, kind of blocking and deflecting and things like that. So I guess that's my kind of lame excuse for not always doing an analysis. And, and obviously I really love their work. And I think that's really helped so many more practitioners be more analytic in how they practice. And I try to do that where I can. But at the same time, there's been some circumstances where it's been a challenge to do.
Yeah, I think it's nice to hear you say that, Matt, because I know, the longer I've been in the field, the more it has been what do we do with the, child who's got, like a trauma history or mood disorder. And there is that sense of, I could probably, find the triggers, but the response, the consequence for the challenging behavior is so different. Yeah, there's no turning it off. It's going to happen now. And sometimes you get around that with, I'll do a latency analysis and that'll help. But sometimes it does have that sense of all I'm doing is switching what reinforcers are available to some other reinforcers that might be available. That kind of, now we're going to win the boss level, like you were saying. It shifts and shifts and shifts. And there are so many environmental contexts that to just let's keep digging down. Is this the best way to come up with a meaningful treatment? Or am I just doing this to answer a question that I'm the only one who's asking?
Yeah. So you can direct your
It can become quite
your
artificial.
rebuttals to matt@behavioralobservations.com and I'll forward them all to Rob.
Well, sometimes you started out looking for what's maintaining this behavior in the natural environment, and through the process, you've ended up creating such an artificial environment that you're no longer answering the correct question.
Yeah, so some sort of observation, maybe a manipulation of sorts, and then putting together your thoughts onto paper. There's probably a step I'm forgetting here as we're just kind of chit-chatting here at 9:00 at night. But anyway, so I don't know about you guys. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this. But when I write reports, I agonize over every syllable. Okay, I'm seeing you guys. I'm seeing nodding heads.
Oh yeah,
I agonize. One of the things I think is writing FBAs is I find it's like the thing I procrastinate the most about. It's so I beat the crap out of myself. I'm kind of kidding here, but oh my gosh, I gotta write that, and I'm very happy when they're done, but it's just like I said, I obsess over everything because the tone of these reports, in my opinion, has to strike such a balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you get it wrong, you are going to do one or two things. You'll either, just give bad information. And I'm less worried about that because by the time you sit down to write, hopefully you've got a good handle on what the phenomena are. But if it comes off too judgmental, you're going to lose the audience that you so badly need.
Right.
Right. And so that's why it's just enormous. It just takes it takes me so much time. And I really have so much respect for people who can just sit down and bang out a report that is, very nicely written, makes all the points succinctly in a way that it doesn't sugarcoat things, but it's not overly harsh and it's not overly judgmental. And that's it's a wicked challenge, right? Because, what you're trying to do is basically point out all the reinforcement errors that are being made in this kid's learning history. And that's a really touchy thing to describe in such a way that you don't avoid upsetting people. And so oftentimes I'll kind of preview what I'm thinking with, whoever the major stakeholder is, whether it's the teacher or the parent or whatever, and say, this is where I'm going with this. This is what I'm thinking here. And just kind of, break it down from there. So that it's not just that you airdrop a report on them and they're just like, what the hell is this? I'm a crappy teacher. It's like, no, you're not a crappy
Recommendation
teacher.
1, new teacher.
Yeah. No, this kid has a complex learning history and it makes sense that you would do X, Y, and Z because maybe X, Y, and Z was really helpful for 90% of the kids you work with. But for this particular student, it happens to be it's very reinforcing. It's getting us the opposite of what your repertoire has gotten other students.
I think it's also really hard to teach too. So for new consultants, this is a really hard skill to teach them how to make that fine balance between not being a super judgy behavior analyst, but also getting those points across, right?
Yeah.
I think that comes with time.
what I do sometimes is I will, sanitize the report in such a way that there's no identifying information. I'll ask other people's input on it.
I try to read mine out loud because I'm the same as you, Matt. Like, I love getting in. I love meeting the teachers. I love meeting the parents. I love meeting the students. I do all the work and I'm like, bam, I got it. I know what's going on. I can come. Oh, I got to write it. Wow. What if I just told you what I found? And then,
I should clean my desk first.
Oh, so painful, because you're right. It is very hard to both be precise. You want to make sure you're writing a document that's going to stay with that student potentially forever.
100%. That's a great point.
So if you write something that either paints a picture of the student as some sort of, holy terror, is someone later going to read it and be upset or assume a lot about the student that's no longer true? But it has to make sense, because you never know. There might be another consultant someday. There might be another BCBA. And if, they have to be able to read that report and say, these all sound like the exact same environmental variables. I don't need to do another assessment. It seems like there's an error in procedure. They're going to be able to come up with, faster treatment options. So you're trying to do all that, but you're also trying not to sound like, I'm a scientist and I'm here to tell you these boring facts, or I'm trying to, and I found myself in so many meetings. I'm like going through my report and I'm like trying to listen to myself. I'm like, do I sound like the most boring, factual, unemotional human being? Or do I sound like I'm so mad at this student for making me write this report for them? Or do I sound like I'm just sort of nonchalantly like, hey, whatever, read never, like, how am I coming across? It is agonizing. Like, I think you said that. It's agonizing.
It's agonizing. Yeah. I mean, at meetings when I'll summarize reports, I never really try to read them word for word. Yep. Another thing I'll do too is I've read reports where people actually like go blow by blow through a particular observation. Mm-hmm. And they might list like their observations for several instances of target behaviors. And I always found, I admire their thoroughness. But for me, what I've been doing recently, I've actually been doing for a while, is I'll summarize my impressions, and because honestly, no, I don't think that, like that makes sense to us, right? But I think really what the stakeholders want is a summary. They want the big picture of, then they're not going to want like, well, they sat down for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then a piece of paper was put in front of them. And then Bobby was told to write his name. Mm-hmm. And then he crumpled up the paper and said, F you. I might tell a story or a vignette, if you will, of one episode that is illustrative of the overall repertoire that drives the point home. I've done that. And so I usually kind of do that as an alternative.
Yeah.
So, you don't want the report to read like stereo instructions. You want the reader to come away with, what the best reinforcer for me is for when someone reads one of my, an FBA that I've written.
What?
Is I totally get that. You've described what I've been experiencing. Mm-hmm. And that's when I'm like, yes, that's right. It's like, it's the most reinforcing thing in the world. It's right up there with some of the other, big reinforcers and, professionally, and so if you can get that response, that I think you're in the ballpark. But basically you want to describe, what you see as the major factors that are hindering this particular individual and provide some suggestions that will hopefully be helpful.
Yeah.
Matt, how did you develop those types of skills? Like, how did you learn how to write these reports and how to interact with teachers? Like, as new BCBAs that want to be consultants, I mean, I would recommend reading these articles, but we all know that article reading doesn't produce desired outcomes. So, how did you start off learning how to do those two things, you think?
I learned them slowly.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Me too, right? I think that's important for people to know.
And I still make those mistakes. So it's not that I've got this, to such level of fluency that I don't have to think about it. If you've been consulting long enough, you've probably had, consulting arrangements that are very reinforcing to you. And then you've got the others, right? And so the others are harder to perform in, right? Because they might be, less fun. They might be a little bit more aversive than the places where people are like, loving everything you're doing and, doing all the things you want and all that stuff. There may be, I've had a number of, teams that I've assisted where you come into the environment and it's very intense, contentious. The stakes are super high. Like someone wants a child to go out of district and someone doesn't. And, and so those are harder places to perform in. So I guess what long story short, Jackie, is that I've learned these skills over time, and I've only recently been able to kind of articulate them, and that's, one of the things that I would probably recommend is, if you want to hear me kind of, go on a even more extended monologue about this is I did an episode about a year and a half ago on school consultation. It's the only solo episode that I've done on behavioral observation. So we can link to that. But yeah, it's just a lot of trial and error, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't, taking a long time to learn, and so I think there's some good resources out there. Like I think the Bailey and Birch book, the 25 Essential Skills, that should be kind of required reading.
Some of the chapters are a little outdated.
Yeah. I think I could probably guess which ones.
There's only a few though.
Yeah, the whole put your phone. No, I'm just kidding. It's not the but yeah, I mean, there's some resources like that have been out there that come to mind. One of the things I've actually thought of doing with a friend of mine who works in the schools is putting together some sort of, I don't know whether it will be a book or some sort of webinar or something like that on these sorts of things. But we had a lot more work to do to kind of figure out how we'd summarize all this stuff. Because right now, again, a lot of this stuff is pretty intangible, So yeah, I don't have I wish I said, go read this book or go,
Well, I'm glad you said that though. That's kind of the answer that I was hoping you would say, because I think a lot of new BCBAs come out thinking I'm going to be a great consultant because I've passed the exam and I've been a BCBA, but there's an entirely different skill set that one must learn in order to be an effective consultant than just to be a BCBA in a school district. And I think you do learn that over time, unfortunately. And I don't think that is something that you just are like, oh, I'm so good at it, right? Like,
yeah. But very briefly, the Gini and Zabulski article was looking at consultation for school psychologists. And they looked at self-efficacy, which I hate studies that look at self-efficacy because it's like a study of what do you think? How do you think you're doing? Which is not quite the same as I think the results we're looking for. But it did speak to the idea of remembering that consultation is not just about the problem solving, step. It's also about the overall process of consulting. So a lot of kind of what you were describing in your process, Matt, really went into that, building the relationship, showing respect for the people you're consulting to, and how these are skills that, can be taught or they can be learned through, reflection. But one of the challenges that they also found was that as people do more and more consulting, they take longer to sort of make big changes in their process, not so much because they're not doing a good job, but because I think the longer you do this, the more you realize there are so many variables that I never paid attention to when all I thought was I need to do an FA. And then based on that, there are probably 3 or 4 treatments and I can show people how to do those. I've trained, RBTs before, and then I'll be done and everything will be great and everyone will be happy. And that's such a small fraction. Having the answer is such a small fraction of the overall consulting process. There's really the problem solving, and then there's just the general, how do I get anywhere with the consulting? And that is a skill that, it feels very intangible. It does not feel like something that can be just sort of learned by you pass the test. You have to do a lot of it and practice it and get feedback and then reflect on those meetings that are reinforcing with everyone smiling at you. Yeah, that's what I see. And the meetings where you're like, well, thank you so much. We'll call you.
That's right.
So you're saying it's not about
when the phone doesn't ring, you'll know it's me.
Yeah.
You're saying, Rob, it's like sort of like life's a journey, not a destination.
Well,
is it kind of like that with consulting?
The real treasure was the friends we made along the way.
That's right.
Yes, very true.
What's funny is last summer, being a school-based consultant, my summer, is kind of slow, kind of like my schedule is now. But friend of mine who runs a clinic nearby, one of her BCBAs went out on maternity leave, and so I worked in the clinic for about 6 weeks or so. So give a shout out to Keen Perspectives and White River Junction. Anyway, I was just joking with it's like these staff, I asked them to do stuff, and get this, they do it. It's amazing. I don't have to argue with them, or there's no discussion about what will well, I've heard this is where it works, so it's just it's a different setting.
All right. Well, I hate to break us here, but let's take a very quick break. And then when we come back, let's talk about the tail end of consulting. How do you end the consulting relationship? Hopefully with success. We'll be right back. And we're back talking with Matt Cicoria about school-based consulting. So when we left, we were talking about building that relationship, starting the consulting relationship. Now we're going to talk a little bit about follow-up. If you don't mind, I sort of want to start with a quick review of the article by Noell et al. From 2000 in JABA talking about school consulting, which was odd because it was one of the few consulting, like pure consulting articles that I found in the behavior analytic literature. There was a lot in the school psychology literature that talked about behavior, but not as much in our own journals. I mean, there were tangential pieces like the Critchfield article that we mentioned, the 10 tips for talking about behavior analysis.
It's a good one.
And one of the things that, just very briefly on this one, that I thought was important, I don't really care about the treatment they were consulting because that's not germane to our conversation, but really looking at sort of the different formats consulting can take. And they pretty much had they had 5 teachers they were consulting on a program with. And they sort of had different stages where they had their treatment, they talked about the treatment, and then they sort of had the different levels of consulting. So one being here, I'm going to tell you about a treatment, and then I'll show you how to do it, and then you do it, and I'll tell you if you did it right or wrong. And then that's it. Bye. And how did the treatment go? How much did the teachers then follow up with the treatment? They then had a follow-up phase where they did hey, I'm checking in every day. How do you think things are going? What's going on? Any problems? Any questions? So again, that's sort of like flyby or drive-by consultation that you might get or you may have received in the past. Then they have the follow-up where they did what we would usually expect from like a behavior skills training, where they really did lots and lots of performance feedback. They did it, almost every single day. Then they sort of faded it to every few days as the teachers started showing high percentages of procedural integrity. And then they also had one teacher, which I thought was interesting, where the treatment was remind the teacher that they had a meeting with that student's parents coming up and the principal, and they were going to have to share the results of whether that treatment had been effective. And so, as you might expect, I think this is the common denominator whenever we talk about teaching someone how to do something. The teachers that just kind of got the training and then sort of were left to their own devices, 2 out of the 5 did okay, but then over time really dropped off in their ability to follow through with the procedure. When they started doing the check-ins or quick follow-ups, really only 1 of the 5 teachers showed any level of high percentage of procedural integrity. Only when they started doing performance feedback did they see consistent high percentages of procedural integrity with the treatment. So 3 out of 5 did a very good job with that. 1 had a hard time and only actually showed an improvement when they were reminded of a meeting coming up where they actually were going to have to present these findings to a parent, which would sort of be, I think, the aversive situation that we all don't really want to be a part of, though potentially you may need to use, I guess you could last resort, break in case of emergency, remind a teacher, remind the person you're consulting to that, hey, someone's going to get mad at you someday. It's not going to be me because I'm going to leave eventually.
She probably had a lot going on.
Yeah, she seems like she was pretty busy. So again, at least in terms of this specific procedure, there is that concern, I think, when you're consulting of how much time do I need to make sure is given to training of the individuals? Is it going to be too much time? Is it going to be enough to sustain this treatment over time? And I know that's always a big question I have of, I could come in every single day, but realistically, even as an employee of a school district, I can't just focus on this one case forever. At some point, I'm going to have 10 other problems that I have to deal with. And this case is going to be one that I can only check in once a week or once every other week. Have I done enough to make sure that that's not going to torpedo the whole thing? Matt, it must be even harder for you because as someone who's coming from outside, at some point, you sort of know when you start, like, I need you to do this for 2 weeks and then you have to leave. Like, we don't want to pay you anymore, kind of must become kind of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think the neat thing about this article, it does, at the very least, this article accomplishes a very clear demonstration that, telling people stuff is not sufficient. So that's one of the things that I just, sometimes it's just those very non-subtle messages like that can be really helpful and certainly help remind us because it is very easy even for behavior analysts to kind of rely on like, well, I've told you so. And, I really, as far as, when to follow up, how to follow up and stuff like that, at least for the work that I do, it does vary considerably based on what the situation is. There are some individuals that I work with that have, they might have major blow-ups, but they occur infrequently, and so sometimes I'll be telling the teams like, we might not know whether this is effective for a long time. And so there are considerations like that. Whereas if you have an individual with a repertoire of very high rate problem behavior, you'll know right away, because the learner will demonstrate, straight sensitivity or not to the treatment applied. And so kind of getting back to how we started the discussion earlier is, the data have to be our guide here in terms of, how that all shakes out.
When you're called into cases, you have to pretty quickly probably come up with a plan, or at least a general roadmap of sort of what the consultation is going to look like. Have you found that that's gotten easier with time, or every time you're called in, it's like, ooh, what am I going to be proposing? Are districts typically flexible about, if you need another week, go for it, or like, nope, you said a week, so sayonara?
Yeah, I'm very, very grateful that the districts that I work with give me, kind of pretty wide latitude to do what I need to do. So I don't feel like there's not a clock ticking in the back of my head. In fact, I wish there were in times, because I probably get, more done. And so, I've started to, kind of impose my own, kind of limits on, just for the purposes of gas, having the situation where gas doesn't expand to fill the space, if you will, because, so, one of the things that I think is a hard thing in these situations. So, if you're in a consulting role, if you're considering whether or not this is for you, is that you have to, at some point or another, you have to write the darn report in the presence of imperfect information. So if you wait for things to be perfect, if I just had, a couple more data points or whatever, then I really, really know what's going on here. And I'd really, really be able to give even better recommendations. And, that is, perfect can be the enemy of the good in many cases. So you really can talk yourself into not getting things done quickly. And I've done that before. I've done that many times. And so it's something I've really tried to focus on improving. So I want to mention that too, as we're talking about like time course and things like that. But again, the schools I work with have been, I've been fortunate to have really great relationships with them, and not really said like, you only have X number of hours to do this or something like that. So
that's good. Well, that's good. I hope that's most people's experiences, but I suppose part of it might have to do with having, been established, having relationships with a lot of these districts. If you were, say, someone new who maybe a district that had never had a BCBA come in, that a parent's demanding, I need a BCBA, and all right, we'll find the closest one, and might be someone with, very little experience or no relationship. Are there steps you feel you took way back when that have sort of paid out in terms of your ability to sort of build those relationships, in terms of that overall process, in terms of getting the buy-in for the treatment, or the way you've done your training with staff after the fact, or helped with recommendation implementation?
Yeah, I don't really have a formula for you. I think one of the things that I do try to do is to get people talking and then listen to what their concerns are. Sometimes it's just asking questions, and sometimes, and I don't mean to seem, I only kind of figure this out by reverse engineering it. So this is not like something like I learned, like some of this might sound very salesy or whatever, but like, so there was a teacher I was working with, and she had a big poster of a ski area in Vermont. And so I said, oh, I've been there. It's just, and we start talking about, skiing, or it's like, they have pictures of their kids. Oh, how many kids do you have? Oh, I've got 3 kids, blah, 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 and there's a little bit of banter, or, I always pull my wife's a teacher card. That's helpful. That's a good one. Because teachers are thick as thieves, if I may make yet another broad, generalization. and you're either a teacher or you're not. And I'm definitely not. But I'm closer than a lay person or a non-teacher, and so there's that. So there's a lot of it is just trying to I feel like I'm just full of stupid sayings tonight, but there's like a saying, like be interested, not interesting, so if you can kind of think of that and just look for ways to kind of establish yourself as a reinforcer. If someone's going to talk and talk willingly, there's chances are that, that's reinforcing for them. It's kind of like, when you email a faculty member, if you email a researcher about their research, that's super reinforcing for them. Right. And you're going to, and so it's in many ways, it can be for the teacher. If you start asking them about obviously you don't take it to the point of prying, it's like, so you have a boyfriend? No, I'm just kidding. You don't ask personal questions or anything like that. Is that guy ever going to propose to you?
Yeah.
I feel like you're wasting your time here. I'm kidding. You can edit that out, right? No, but that is funny though, because like obviously you don't take it too far. And again, I only know this having, again, trying to reflect and figure out, some of these things in the rearview mirror, so it's just that sort of thing. And again, if you can, another thing I would say too is in that, as a teacher's talking with you, and if you eventually you have, obviously, you don't get paid to chit chat, you don't get paid to socialize. So, you have to kind of turn that conversation towards the task at hand.
Mm.
And one of the things a mentor of mine taught me years ago was deal with the problem that is of most salience to the primary stakeholder, whether that's the parent, if you're doing some sort of consultation in the home setting, or if that's the teacher or the paraprofessional supporting the kiddo who's, getting beat up all the time and things like that. And if you can solve that, then boy, are you in. And then you can work on perhaps some things that you might think are the priority, So that, that's a little tip I'd want to pass on as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. I want to get to kind of our dissemination station because, Matt, you were gracious to sort of list out your 11 general consulting tips. I think will be a great, concise way to end the episode. But really quick, the Menendez article talking about ethics in rural schools. I know, Dinah, you said, I don't know if you wrote this in the notes, but somebody loved this article in the notes. So I would feel bad if we didn't at least touch base on
I think
on
all
that
I want to say is just direct people toward it, and they'll be able to find that on the website because it's a really great article, and I think it could be a really useful article for anyone who's supervising practicum students because it lays out some common scenarios that one might see in a school consulting setting and thinking about how you're going to need to interact with all the players involved in that consultation model and how you're going to solve the problem that's presented there. So it's just really great for that, and it could be great to work through with your students. So that's why I liked it.
It almost felt like a book. Like, so you bought a dog. Like, here's what you need to know about. It's like, so you have a behavior analyst. Here are their ethics. Like, they'll be very concerned about this. Here's what they might say to you.
Yeah.
You can't accept them.
And I think we need more kind of informal stuff like that. And by calling it informal, I don't mean that as a pejorative here. Like I thought the tone was fantastic, and that sort of kind of non-stodgy. Like these are just really some basic things you're likely to run into. And so here are the ethical considerations right down to the code elements. And here's a couple of options for responding to it. There was one of the scenarios I quibbled with their response to that we probably don't have time to get into tonight. But at the very, regardless of that, it was just a nice, it's something definitely different, something we don't see quite a bit in our field. So I would highly recommend people check it out. And then, figure out if consider how you'd respond. Would you respond the same? Would you respond differently?
Right. Yeah.
So I guess let's move into dissemination station. Jack, if you don't come over, we're gonna have to get a soundboard. Go a little louder. We couldn't hear you. There it is. Okay. There it is. Okay, good. This distant sound effect's not working for me. I don't like this. So I guess to start the wrap up, Matt, what's your favorite part of consulting? It's something you've done for a while, so it must be a job that you still enjoy doing. What is the best part? I know I kind of flippantly wrote in the notes. I know I love the fact that when you're consulting, you get to go lots of places. So you get to drive a lot, which can be fun. If you want to listen to music or podcasts, get some time to reflect.
Yeah. I personally, I like going to someplace different every day. I like having the variety. And so just from that alone, I enjoy it. Yeah. So I think that I like getting new referrals because I'm curious, and so it's fun to kind of learn about what's going on with a particular case. It's, so much of what we do is kind of reinforcing to us, when we can get a good outcome or at least try to figure out what's going on. So I find that aspect of the detective work of it fun. And so I really enjoyed that part of it. And certainly, if you can, create a situation where you can create some recommendations that restore some harmony to chaos, then that obviously is incredibly gratifying. So I would say for those three things. So I do kind of like the driving around a little bit. It doesn't bother me as much.
It's more like a nice tangential perk, I think, to the job, like in the move.
Yeah, I've kind of shrunk my radius a little bit over the years. It used to be quite wide, so it's a little bit more manageable these days. But if it wasn't, I'll put it this way: if it wasn't for the insane amount of driving I did, I never would have probably. It would have been many years later until I discovered podcasts, and certainly, I probably would have never created the Behavioral Observations podcast had I not had all this kind of time in the car. So there's that too.
Right. It was the same for me because I was driving around doing home-based, supervision. And it was like, I have all this time in the car. I should listen to something behavior analytic.
There
isn't anything.
There has to be an ABA podcast, right?
No, it wasn't.
That's right.
All the lucky listeners out there, you're living in the golden age of the ABA podcast right now.
It's a gold rush.
There's podcasts out there. They just weren't long standing, right? There was
oh yes.
They weren't active. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Give credit where credit's due.
That's right. Java, and the Precision Teaching podcast, Functionally Speaking, et cetera, et cetera.
So I guess best way to round this out, Matt, you don't need to go into detail because you've either already done it or people can go back and listen to your episode on behavioral observations. But really quickly, the 11 Matt Cicoria rules for golden rules for consulting. Would you mind just kind of going through that list? Because I was loving them when I was reading them before the show started.
All right. So number 1, it's like the old David Letterman show. Number 1. Actually, I will do it the other way around. I would do number 11. No, I'll go 1. Recognize that schools, like any other organizations, schools have distinct cultures. So I kind of go into detail about what that means. And it's definitely a different setting than most. So I just kind of leave it at that. And so, based on schools being kind of distinct cultures, and if you're a consultant, my second tip is kind of don't take yourself seriously. Play up your naivete. One of the kind of things I do is, do you guys remember the SNL skit, The Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, the Phil Hartman?
Good. There's a Phil Hartman one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very old school. I'll sometimes just be like, you know what? I have this, I'm just a guy with a visitor sticker on, right? And tomorrow, and like in an hour from now, I'm going to take this off and throw it away, and I won't be back for a week or so, and so so I kind of use that as like I kind of make fun of myself, if you will, and really kind of lower whatever, especially if a teacher is apprehensive about having someone observe or whatever. I just try to my I guess my shtick is to be, I guess, self-deprecating. And that works for me. Other people might have other things, but the idea is to kind of be disarming, if you will. See, target the behavior that's most important to the teacher. We talked about that. Respect the teacher's time. So what I mean by that is, if you catch a teacher during their planning time, don't assume they want to spend their planning period talking to you. Very, very important.
I've been guilty of that one.
Yeah, I have too. So I always say this. I said, this looks like your planning time. I understand how time is, really important. You probably have copies to make. You probably have things to grade, phone calls to make. Gosh, you probably have to go to the bathroom, and, would you have a few minutes to chat? And so you don't just go in assuming that you're just going to plop down and stuff like that. Meanwhile, the person in the back of their mind, they've got 1,000 other priorities and you're not even close to the top of that list. Respect their time, respect the classroom. I think I talked about that earlier.
Yes.
Be reasonable with data collection assignments. We talked about that. Oh, schools, this is getting better, but it's still way behind kind of the more healthcare oriented settings. Schools are not very well versed in the concept of privacy. So they will tell you everything you want to know and more about the randomest kiddo, or at least that's been my experience. And, someone will be like, well, you're here to watch Johnny, right? Well, Sally over there, holy cow, her dad is in jail and her mom is dead. And I just that happens sometimes, not all the time. And it's happening less frequently as people get more hip to things like FERPA and other, important privacy concerns. Hip to HIPAA. Yeah. So oftentimes I have to say, well, hey, look, if we're going to have this discussion, or if you want me to help with this kiddo, you need to, get the team to make a decision. You need to get the parents' consent, for an observation, yada, yada, yada. And you might need to pull the staff member into a setting to have this conversation as well, because they're attempting to have the conversation in the hallway. There's that. Be humble in all your interactions. There's so many. Every year there's like a new program of reform that, is kind of comes down the pike. And I've heard it so many times from teachers. Oh, this is just one more thing. Yeah. And so, you just have to approach teachers very humbly. Remember that progress might be slower in schools and other settings. We talked about that. Make recommendations based on the student's need, not the school resources. That's a whole podcast episode into itself.
Yeah.
and recognize that not just in schools, but all other settings, people really don't care that much about data or what has more scientific evidence versus less. And so if you say, well, ABA is has the most research, it's the most research backed, intervention for fill in the blank, that means a lot to us. And we, not only does that matter in terms of the facts, certainly, but we also have a source of bias being that we're behavior analysts. But that's not persuasive to many large swaths of the population. So if you rely on that as your persuasive tool, you're going to not be effective. You have to figure out other ways to persuade people to do things differently. So those would be, I think that's 11. So again, I did a whole podcast on all these. You can check that out if you want.
Hi, everyone. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you our second secret code word for this episode, and it is steak. S-T-E-A-K. Steak. It's like a big piece of meat, really good. You get it at a steak house. Maybe you put some A1 sauce on it, though some people will say you should just eat it the way it's prepared, like a T-bone steak. Yum. Now I'm hungry. All right, let's wrap up the show. Steak.
Excellent. I think that's a great way to wrap up the episode, Matt. For everyone out there listening, you can find Matt on his podcast, Behavioral Observations, where he has gone, like you said, Matt, you've gone into as much detail, if not more, with the 11 that we did in our episode tonight. So we got tons of resources about school consulting that now people can, articles to read, podcasts to listen to. There's a lot out there now. Hooray. We did it.
Guys. Thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Oh, it's always great having you. Is there anything else you wanted to share or contact? It's probably on your website because you're behavioralobservations.com, right?
That's right. I can't really think of anything. Oh, yeah. I would say go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review for ABA Inside Track.
Oh, thank you. We would also say you want to go there and leave a 5-star review for Behavioral Observation.
Oh, you're so kind.
Oh, boy. All right, Matt. It was such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. So I also want to say thank you again to Jackie and Diana for co-hosting yet again another one of these podcasts. We want to thank you all for listening. We already did our plugs for Apple Podcasts, but there are a lot of other ways you can reach out. You can do that through social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can go to, these are posted on YouTube. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to these articles. If I remember, I think we write it in our notes. I'll try to remember to find Matthew McConaughey's Lincoln ad. Oh, yeah. As well. Hopefully I'll remember to put those in the notes. Very important to get our McConaughey fix on there. We want to say thank you to Dr. Jim Carr for recording of our intro and outro, to Kyle Sturry for our interstitials, to Daniel Thabit and the podcast doctors for his editing work, and to Hollis Irvin from Sycamore Workshop for his graphic design. Whew, okay. I know it feels like these get longer every couple months, and then I got to try to remember all this stuff. So many people to thank.
One long interverbal.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much again, Matt, for being on. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week with another full-length episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.